Newt, if you read the Robert Mueller report, they talk about a scramble amongst one of the oligarchs, because nobody has any contacts with the incoming Trump administration, and they're tasking one of them, who owns one of these Aspen banks, to go ahead and try to make some contacts because we need to speak to somebody. And we had random Russians calling Hope Hicks's cell phone number, desperately trying to get a meeting with a higher up. Does that sound like somebody who colluded with Russia? Newt Gingrich, welcome.
Good to be with you. Look, this whole thing would be a farce if it weren't so serious. The fact is that there was never any evidence that the president colluded with anybody. There's no evidence in 428 pages. There's no evidence that the president in any way obstructed anything. Mueller got to see everybody he wanted to see, except the president himself, and the president agreed to submitting written questions and answers. Mueller got to put people in solitary confinement. In one case, a woman served over half of her potential sentence in solitary confinement in a way that I think is very un-American. Mueller had lots and lots of lawyers, virtually all of them anti-Trump, very smart lawyers, very good prosecutors from very expensive law firms. And after 2 years, what do they got? And the most startling thing, if anybody wants to know how sick the system got, it's Mueller's assertion that he couldn't exonerate Trump. That is exactly the opposite of the American system. In the absence of proof of guilt, somebody's automatically innocent. We don't have to walk around every day proving we're innocent. That's our birthright as Americans. It's the duty of the state to prove we're guilty. And clearly, Mueller could not do that.
So what did you think happened yesterday? What were your thoughts when you were watching him and listening to the way he was phrasing some of these odd statements?
Why?
I have no idea. Look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a historian. And I have no idea what's going on in his head. But my guess is that in his social circles, people felt that he had failed to serve the worthy cause of destroying Donald Trump. And he was trying to sort of cleverly toss it to the Congress and say, gee, if you really want to go do this, you can. He may also have been trying to preempt any request for him to come and testify, because he can now say, hey, I said everything I'm going to say. But it was a very bizarre briefing. It wasn't really a press conference. And Alan Dershowitz did a brilliant job within a very few minutes of taking it apart in an article on The Hill and just step by step proving that Mueller didn't have the right to say the things he was saying. So I think for historians, they're going to look back and say, if you want to see how deeply, passionately anti-Trump the establishment was, look at how a career FBI agent, federal judge, senior official turns everything on its head. I mean, Mueller yesterday reversed the American tradition. He says of the Russians, they're innocent until proven guilty. And in the next paragraph, he says he can't prove the president's innocent. So his standard for the American president is dramatically lower than his standard for Russians. You couldn't have made that up.
Well, you talk about Alan Dershowitz's response. Well, Democrats had an immediate response as well. And if Bob Mueller's intent was to ramp up impeachment talk, he succeeded with that. Ultimately, here's a montage of some in the media and Democrats talking right after Mueller spoke for 9 minutes.
This is as close to an impeachment referral as you could get.
He told us enough to interpret what he said as a referral for impeachment proceedings.
With respect to impeachment question, at this point, all options are on the table.
What is now the widely held expectation that the Democratic-controlled Congress will have no choice but to open an impeachment inquiry into President Trump.
Sounds like the special counsel is calling for Congress to pick up where he left off. That process has a name. It begins with the letter I. Impeachment.
If the House leadership doesn't start hearings now, I believe it's hard to see them ever doing it in the months ahead. Again, now or never.
So game plan this out, Mr. Speaker. What's next? Knowing you're dealing with
it's easy.
Nadler
I think the last
Schiff.
comment's perfect. If it's now or never, it's going to be never. Nancy Pelosi watched what we went through in 1998. She understands that the average American gets very rapidly fed up, that the average American does not want to see the Congress spend its time on impeachment. She also understands that the Republican Senate will never convict, ever. It's not going to happen. And I think she's trying to sort of put the brakes on. I actually thought she was pretty direct yesterday. Then she said almost dismissively, look, 10% of my conference or 10% of the Congress wants to go forward. That does not intimidate me. So I think she's saying the answer is never. And I think she's probably going to end up succeeding. The presidential candidates, of course, are all trying to make noise, and they're all trying to appeal to the most radical wing of their party. And I think in some ways the decisive person will be Joe Biden. Biden lived through the Watergate period. He lived through the Clinton impeachment. He has had real experience. And my hunch is that Biden's going to come out and say, you know, we ought to move on to solving problems, and this is a dead end.
Yeah, I mean, the decision that is, the tagline that is impeach him at the ballot box. And if they were smart politically, that's the pivot they would make. All eyes on Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, as you said.
And by the way, I have what Vice President Biden's camp said. Vice President agrees with Speaker Pelosi that no one should relish what would certainly be a divisive impeachment process, but that it may be unavoidable if the administration continues on its path for all these reasons and many more. Vice President Biden will continue to make the case as why he should be the president. And that the president should not get reelected. So he's not jumping in, but he's not jumping out.
Some are wondering why he did this. Did he do this to make Barr look biased? Nancy Pelosi is now going after Barr again, saying he lied and he misrepresented Robert Mueller. Listen to this.
The report, it has been misrepresented grossly by the Attorney General, misrepresenting in his spoon-fed by his own choosing of words what the Mueller report was about. He did a disservice to truth, and he did a service to the country.
The Attorney General then concluded that it was appropriate to provide our report to Congress and to the American people. And I certainly do not question the Attorney General's good faith in that decision.
Is this fair to put Barr back in the spotlight, Newt?
Of course, look, the Democrats and the left-wing media are terrified of the power the president has given Attorney General Barr to declassify information. It's the first time in my lifetime that elements of the news media like the New York Times and the Washington Post are not in favor of publishing secrets. And the reason is there are a number of people in the Obama administration, potentially including Vice President Biden, who are in danger of serious embarrassment. There are a lot of things that have come up. And that's where, again, Mueller's closing lines about how noble and wonderful all these people were. Well, you know, one of them is potentially going to be indicted for lying. Comey clearly has some significant legal problems. You have several people like Strzok who were viciously anti-Trump. You have the totally false use of what we now know as a phony British agent-designed report. I mean, you go down the list of stuff. So it's a little strange that Mueller would try to cast a blanket of honor and nobility over all these activities. But the left understands if the attention turns away from Donald Trump and it turns back to just how sick was the establishment in trying to destroy Trump, they have a big problem on their hands.
And Newt, finally, you know what it's like to be at loggerheads with a president and still want to get stuff done. So the President of the United States was said, if you got to make a decision, Nancy Pelosi, legislate or investigate, is there a third way? And do you encourage the president to start do something in immigration, the border, USMCA, anything like that?
Sure. Sure. Look, I mean, first of all, much as I like Donald Trump, as a former Speaker of the House, I also believe Speakers of the House aren't dictated to by presidents. And so, you know, Pelosi can do anything she wants to. She can investigate and legislate. Then the president has a problem. I mean, if the Democrats were clever, which they have not been so far, they would pass some really popular legislation. They would pass deliberately bipartisan legislation. And then the president would have to decide, are you really going to veto this stuff? But instead, they keep just talking at a kind of up here level rather than letting all 435 members have a role. And I think presently what you're going to see, because Mitch McConnell is pretty smart about this, the Senate's going to start producing real legislation. And you're going to have a Republican Senate being productive and a Democratic House pursuing investigations at a time when, as Karl Rove has pointed out on Fox, the increasing number of independents do not want to see this degenerate into pure investigation. So they're driving the independents towards the Republicans by their very behavior.
Check out Newt's World podcast, as well as pick up Collusion. Just two other reasons to like Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, thanks so much.
Thank you.